In May 1916, three figures stumbled out of the frozen mist at a remote whaling station on South Georgia Island. Their clothes were rags, their faces were blackened by frostbite, and they looked like men who had been lost to the elements years ago. They had been. These three had vanished into the Antarctic ice 532 days earlier. By the time they reached this station, the rest of the world presumed them dead. This was the return of Sir Ernest Shackleton, an Anglo-Irish explorer with a reputation for pushing himself and his crews to the absolute edge of the map. In 1914, he recruited 27 sailors, scientists, and craftsmen for the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Their goal was to achieve a feat never before attempted, crossing the entire Antarctic continent on foot. The plan involved sailing into the Weddell Sea, disembarking at Vaxel Bay, and marching straight through the South Pole to reach the opposite coast. They sailed south in search of geographic glory, unaware that a single navigation error was about to destroy their mission and force a pivot to total survival. In early 1915, the Endurance was steered into a dense field of sea ice. Just 100 kilometers from their target landing, the pack ice closed in and froze solid around the hull. They were trapped. With winter approaching, the crew faced months of total darkness and isolation. In this environment, the cold is a constant threat, but the silence and darkness bring a high risk of psychological collapse. Shackleton immediately prioritized morale to keep his men from breaking. He instituted strict daily routines, organized moonlight walks on the ice, and held dog sled races to keep the camp active. By October, the shifting winter ice began to put immense pressure on the ship. The frozen sheets eventually buckled the hull of the Endurance, snapping its heavy timbers and forcing an immediate evacuation. The 28 men were forced onto the unstable floating ice floes, carrying only 3 lifeboats and the barest essentials for survival. They drifted on the melting ice for months. As their supplies vanished, the men were forced to live on raw seal meat and eventually were driven to eat their own sled dogs to stay alive. Every previous ambition had vanished. Success now meant nothing more than waking up the next morning without the ice floe melting away beneath them. When their ice floe disintegrated, the crew launched their lifeboats into the freezing ocean. They endured 7 days of constant rowing before finally reaching land. They had reached Elephant Island, a desolate rock sitting entirely outside of human shipping lanes. No rescue ship was ever going to find them here. Facing starvation, Shackleton took 5 men in a lifeboat to attempt to reach the whaling stations on South Georgia Island, a 1,300-kilometer journey. This meant crossing the Drake Passage, battling hurricane-force winds and 12-meter rogue waves for 16 days in a small, open boat. They survived the crossing, but the ocean currents forced them to land on the uninhabited western side of South Georgia. The environment had systematically stripped away every resource they had, shrinking options from an entire continent to a single trapped ship, to a melting ice floe, and finally to their broken bodies. One final barrier remained, a 40-kilometer stretch of unmapped glaciers and razor-sharp mountain peaks that stood between them and the whaling station. 3 of the men were too physically shattered to walk, forcing Shackleton and 2 others to attempt the crossing alone. They had no map and no climbing gear, yet they marched for 36 hours straight, scaling sheer rock faces and crossing glaciers that had never been navigated before. Quiet, building emotion. As they crossed the final ridge, they heard the faint sound of a steam whistle from the whaling station, the first sound of human activity they had heard in over 500 days. Completing that climb proved that human willpower can outlast extreme physical limits when the lives of an entire crew depend on it. Shackleton and his 2 men reached the station and immediately began organizing a rescue mission. The ice, however, was not finished. Shackleton mounted 3 separate rescue attempts over the next 4 months, all of which were repelled by impenetrable pack ice. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, a 4th rescue attempt broke through the mist at Elephant Island. Shackleton found all 22 of the men he had left behind still alive. Against every mathematical odd, the outcome was total. Shackleton set out with 28 men into an apocalyptic environment, and despite losing his ship and his supplies, he brought exactly 28 men home. The expedition failed every geographic goal, yet it remains history's definitive survival story. Shackleton met the total collapse of his original mission with an adaptable, relentless refusal to surrender a single life to the ice.